Alrighty, well, hello everyone, and huge thank you for joining us today on a discussion about proving the value of platform engineering. This is a lead dev webinar, so welcome. It's created in partnership with Harness, and we will have about 45 minutes today, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack channel, where we're going to answer questions in the effective teams channel. So make sure that you join our Slack workspace if you haven't already. We'll also keep an eye out on the Q&A function of Zoom, so make sure you use that feature if you have any questions and you want to ask us anything that you're thinking about. We'll get we'll do a round out at the end for any questions that we might have missed. So we're going to get started with some introductions. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Tiffany Jokja, and today I'll be joined by some amazing panelists to share their experiences and insights. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves. They can go over some more about themselves and their experience with platform engineering. I think we'll just start with Daniel to kick us off.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Daniel Bryant. I currently run product marketing at Syntasso, the creators of Kratix, which is an open source framework for building platforms. In a previous life, I was a Java developer, then moved through to architect, ultimately platform builder as well. And I did everything from IC work to CTO work, consulting, in-house stuff as well. I'm going to share some of my successes, I guess, and also some of my non-successes along the way. Hopefully you can learn from that and make new mistakes, shall we say. I'll hand over to Gal.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Gal. Today, I'm head of engineering at Epsagon, which was acquired by Cisco. We did a lot of observability, especially in the serverless space. That's kind of my connection to platform engineering. In the last year, since the acquisition, I've transformed into more of an architect role, overseeing several startups that were combined together to build a big product. And obviously, the need for platform engineering in this kind of space is very large, and this is part of my responsibility to see how we are harmonizing the platform across all of these startups. Before of that, I did a lot of cool cybersecurity stuff at the IDF, but that's kind of unrelated to platform engineering. That's me. Martin, you can go ahead.
Sure. So I'm Martin Reynolds. I'm a field CTO at Harness. Harness is a software delivery lifecycle platform where currently we help organizations build and deliver their platforms and then deliver those products onto the platform. But prior to that, and probably the most relevant, I mean, I've been a software engineer for 30 plus years, but in my last role, I went from putting the first product in the cloud to actually, getting 40 products in the cloud and then moving those onto a platform. With consistent UI, consistent API methods, backends, and also ways of delivering it with things like, constant pipelines and stuff like that. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your introductions. We have a very knowledgeable panel with us. So I'm excited to dive in deeper to explore how platform teams can define success, how they can measure their effectiveness, and ultimately demonstrate value to both developers and their organizations. So very cool experiences that we're gonna tap into here. I want to kick us off with a sort of wider view of platform engineering, and maybe we could start with Daniel on this one. But what are successful platform engineering teams measuring? What are they doing?
Yeah, great opening, Tiffany. I definitely think so. Looking at platform engineering, say as an evolution, perhaps from DevOps, for me, it's all about enabling developers to go faster, be safer, and scale more efficiently. I think that's the key thing with platforms, right? And the way it's different in my mind than DevOps is we're actually building a product. I'm sure we're going to touch on this a bunch, but a platform as a product, I think all of us sort of buy into that very much. And if you've got this product mindset, the way you measure that is very different than measuring projects. Like projects like, am I on time? Am I under budget? What was the risk kind of vibe? But products are longer running things. So I think there's lots of great prior art in the space if you're looking to measure the impact of platforms. There's like the Dora, great work from Dr. Nicole Forsgren and crew, and there's Abby Noda and crew, and Laura Tacco doing amazing work with DX around these things. And in my mind, like the Dora metrics are really good to look at. The space framework, which again, Dr. Nicole Forsgren was involved in, and some other folks, and they give you this kind of framework to measure the impact of your platform engineering efforts, but also like some of the guardrails as well. So you want to optimize for throughput and delivery, but you also want to not get breached and not have security incidents. So sort of measuring those things are really critical. And then because we're doing this product, you also need to think about like product adoption metrics. And I've taken a lot of cues from Camille Fournier and Ian Noland in their amazing O'Reilly book that came out recently. And they talked a lot about product metrics like adoption and happiness, like developer experience, we'd call it, right? So a lot of things to measure. Don't try and do them all at once is how I'll start before I hand over to someone else on the panel. But I do think about the sort of impact of the work you're doing, both from the business side, the tech side, and the people side. They are critical things to kind of balance. And I'm sure we're all going to say it's pretty hard to do that. But if you get it right, magic happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I look at what we should be measuring as platform engineering teams, I see kind of two layers. The first layer is what's the goal, the impact that we're trying to achieve on the organization, right? And that's probably going to be like any product basically measuring, and that's not just platform engineering. Any product is measuring adoption, like how well it gets new users, and then retention, how retained those users are. And then those like very high level metrics, you are using them to get actual value, right? You want to improve the user experience in some way, help him do some sort of new thing that he couldn't before. So I think with platform, it's pretty much the same. You want, like, if you only measure change failure rate or something like that, it really may have nothing to do with you. Maybe the teams are just improving on their change failure rate. So the first layer is you want to make sure that what you're building is adopted and retained. But then the second layer is this impact that you're trying to measure, right? Like, has the change failure rate improved? Has the deployment frequency improved? So those kind of two-layered approach is interesting because somehow it interconnects, right? You can measure adoption by the fact that if you know that everyone is, when using your tool, the deployment frequency is improving, then maybe the adoption is rising. So you have to kind of think on it on those two levels. Like, what am I trying to do and how am I measuring it? The technical measurement and then the business goal of it.
You know, on this occasion, I feel like I can't add much more to that apart from driving into the specific details across those two things. I feel like, you know, that's a pretty good coverage. I still always feel like starting with Dora is the best place to start because it's a well-defined framework, you know, it's well understood and it's generally understood that there is value to it beyond, you know, beyond just the platform and the software engineering teams. You know, businesses know what that is in general, so it's a really good place to start, and then kind of expand out from there. And you know, there is some of those things that I, you know, beyond that I'd probably love to pull out in detail. I think the one I think Daniel mentioned was around security, that it's not a Dora metric, but that security and governance thing. And, you know, having a logical measure that makes sense, like, you know, how many, for example, how many vulnerabilities were found and resolved during your, you know, your route to getting on, you know, getting into production, you know, which is kind of, you know, a great way to kind of express risk, but it's part of that security and it's kind of outside the core Dora stuff, but it's something that adds value across the business.
You know, it's funny because it really is easier to measure than developer experience, right? If we're talking about like the goal of platform, which is cost, security, and developer experience, people are really keen on measuring developer experience. But security impact is really easy to measure. Like, if you caught X vulnerabilities in the process and they didn't make it to production, then yeah, that's obviously a value that you can sell to the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to explore this some more then. Let's chat about the value that we bring, that platform engineering teams and investments can bring to the business, but also developers. How should folks ensure that, you know, what we're investing in terms of the platform and the features that we're building meets both the needs for developers and the business?
Yeah, I love this question because it's kind of the first thing that we do, and this is really probably what all of three of us recommended, right? You want to measure Dora metrics. And then you go to the CIO, or actually not even the CIO, someone who is not a technical person, and you're like, hey, I improved the deployment frequency. And he's like, okay, so what? Like, how does that help me? How does that translate to something that's actually meaningful for the business? Maybe that's the third layer, right? Because you want to make sure that whatever you're measuring is actually impactful for the business, and work your way back from that. Like, what impact am I trying to get on the business? Are we having adoption problems of the product because we're not innovating fast enough, because we don't have deployment frequency that's good enough? Are we having retention problems because there are a lot of bugs in our software, because the change failure rate is high? That's what we need to optimize. Like, if you can make those ties for the business executive, then you can make a case that you're doing stuff that is aligned with their interest, that the investment is aligned with the business interest.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of keeping it aligned. I think the other thing, and I think again it was Daniel in the last question touched on this. If you flip that to the developer side, you know, really meeting the developers' needs is really about, you know, kind of understanding that the platform is a product and that they're the consumers, and so what you're actually doing is taking away the things that they don't necessarily like doing. You know, I use this stat a lot, but you know, it's pretty much accepted industry-wide that engineers and developers spend, you know, 30 to 40% of their time actually doing the thing that they're employed to do, which is building, writing code, solving problems. And the amount of times they come out of that flow of, you know, getting in the zone, solving the problem, you know, understanding the code and kind of delivering on new features or resolving bugs or whatever it is. You know, if they're spending 60 plus or more percent of their time outside of that, doing stuff to make sure that that product gets all the way, that change gets through all the testing and everything else, then, you know, what you really want to be, you know, focusing on is, as part of that platform, is essentially looking at what are those things that are taking time, that are repetitive, that can be automated, where you can add value in the platform by simplifying those processes, taking away essentially that toil for the, you know, for the engineers, and making it part of the platform so that they have a better experience in delivering it.
Taking on a slight like sort of tangent to that as well, because a big plus one to what you both said there. I think like my journey, one of the key unlocks for me was, if I wasn't sure on stuff, like find someone in the organization I could trust and ask them. Like particularly when I was more like a mid manager or whatever, and I was like, and how do I translate what, like, developers are screaming CI is failing all the time and I need to put an investment there, but like how do I translate that to, like, to as you said, Martin, like to the, you know, C-level folks or the board even sometimes, right? And actually finding like a sponsor or finding someone that can help you make that translation was a big unlock for me. You got to be careful sometimes, like folks are not always aligned with your interests, even when they say they are. I definitely had a couple of consulting gigs where I actually turned out the sponsors were anti-sponsors, and they were kind of sending me slightly down a different direction. But like just asking folks, like, what's the most important thing for Q1, for Q2? How are you being measured? How are you being incentivized? And that then, for me, gave me a framework to translate, hey, CI/CD is painful for developers, but look, it's actually causing a whole bunch of rework for us, and that's costing us more money, like in terms of dev time. And that translation there was a real powerful unlock for me. So making sure everything's aligned. Always got to think about developers, but don't be afraid as a techie. Sometimes I was a bit like, I'll just leave the business people doing their thing. And that was a mistake looking back at my career. I should have much more engaged with the business earlier on and said, what do you folks want? Here's my problems, and we'll, you know, meet in the middle kind of thing, and actually deliver value that everyone's going to like.
Yes, I'm sure that you all have experienced having to walk back or walk away from a particular approach when it comes to proving the value of platform engineering and building a platform. We actually have a really great question in chat about evolving platforms and really like making a platform. So how do you differentiate a framework from a platform? And let's say you do have like a particular approach that you've laid out in a framework. How do you evolve that or start to move forward or take tangible steps forward?
That's actually a really, really interesting question, because, you know, that kind of evolution of platform, because generally platform starts small, and you know, that definition of what the platform is, it's really kind of, you know, it overlaps a little with the kind of whole golden pathways, or, you know, or landing zones, or whatever the terminology is that you want to use. You know, it overlaps very much with that. And what, you know, there's kind of a double-edged sword here, because you want that consistency and you want to make sure that things are, getting reuse and the automation, but then to iterate on that, you need to have a mechanism that works for expanding that out. And I know in my previous org, and actually other orgs I've worked with recently, one of the common ways they do that is they will actually have a sandbox area kind of parallel to the platform to kind of drive innovation out. So in fact, we even used to call it the innovation account. So you could go in and say, hey, I want to try this thing out. We'd give them some credentials for a couple of weeks. They could go in and try it out. And then essentially we had a mechanism say, hey, this would really add value to product A that we're working on, but we really think it would add value to the platform. How do we get it in? And then they go back to the platform. So I think there's that kind of organic growth side, which is allowing the developers to innovate, adding things to the platform that add value, and letting them try stuff out. But then I think equally, there's the kind of piece where you're saying, well, where is the friction in my platform now? Where am I getting tickets, for example, that do that? And I think that's more of a platform. I think more of a framework is less of a managed thing and more of a, I mean, it's managed, but it's more of a definition of how to do things rather than a place that actually does a lot of those things for you. So it's like, this is our framework of how we do stuff like this. This is all our processes. This is our, how we do APIs, how we do, that's great. And that is part of platform, but platform is actually, delivering something that's actually providing value to the business and to the developers because it's making work easier, getting product out faster, features out faster. And then iterating on that, like I say, is either finding those friction points and removing them, or, make sure your engineers can do the thing that they probably love most, which is innovate. I will throw one more in, and I know we have a bunch of questions, but one of the other things that I've seen, both in my own, my own history and elsewhere is, we held hackathons, but we held hackathons that were specifically for the platform. So it was like, okay, you can do, here's some categories, but it all has to be built and delivered on the platform, right? Or here's some categories, and one of those is let's extend the platform, right? So really kind of, developers have at it for a couple of days. It's a hackathon, so they're going to take a ton of shortcuts, but that's fine because what it does is it drives great ideas and sometimes things that you wouldn't normally get time for, and it's definitely worth the investment from the business.
Yeah, I agree. I want to even do like you plus one to what you said, and especially on the iterative part, because I think one major pitfall of platform is to select one point in time and say, okay, now we're going to build a platform and go on this gigantic project to rebuild or re-architect this whole thing. Often what it leads to is a lot of wasted effort, a platform that is unusable because it's like a long project and is not tested frequently, not a lot of buy-in from management. And it makes sense, right? Because that's also not the way we're building products. The way we're building products today is iteratively, slowly. So I'd say at least at the beginning and in the early stages, you don't have to select a point in time and like put on the goggles and say, okay, now we're going to build in a platform. Do it iteratively. Just start by finding one use case that is good, one use case that is painful, solve it, expand it, expand it. Let it grow naturally. It's funny, what we're talking about here is kind of like skills that are, okay, if you look at a Scrum team, for example, a Scrum team has a Scrum Master, engineers, but it also has a product manager. You don't expect usually the engineers or the Scrum Master to hold those skills of translating from the business needs or the customer needs to the actual what we're building and doing this iterative process. And it's okay. A lot of engineers have those skills, but if in the case that you don't have the skills, then you should make sure that someone in the team has those skills. So you can bring in a platform PM, you can bring in an engineer that is experienced in those domains. But I think it's really important to make sure, if you're going back to being aligned with the business need, that you have those skill set within the platform team.
I think we're all like super aligned here, which is really interesting, right? And I'll like say the same thing that we've all said in a slightly different way. Definitely, when I was a consultant, I was brought in to do platform rescues, and a big chunk of those rescues were people like trying to replicate complex systems, like in a next generation. And there's a quote I'm going to mangle, but it's like every good complex system is an evolution of simple systems. Like you want to go simple and then build up to complex. When like in consulting, you often get brought in to rebuild the complex situation. And I was like, I never saw a successful one of those. So actually chatting to people, what do you need? Then I love what you said, Gal. Focus on the use case. That was often a massive win for us. Chat to the whole business. What's the biggest blocker here? Not what you think it is. What's the metrics show us? Oh, again, CI/CD is struggling. All right, we're not getting throughput there, whatever. Right, here's our use case. Maybe build a framework around it. It can be a wiki page, even like this is the way we do things here, right? And then just evolve. And for me, the magic tipping point, I think we've all said it, when you go from sort of framework to platform, I think Martin, you nailed this one, is you have that product mindset. Like a framework is just like a collection of things, like this is kind of how we do stuff. But the platform, the real, when I've seen it work really well in companies, and when it's like it's a literal separate product. Bunch of business facing products, that's how we make our money, right? But the platform becomes a product. That's a bit like you sort of know it when you see it, like the framework is tipped into full platform mode.
Indeed.
Awesome. So thank you for answering the live question. I'm just going to mark that done. I hope that was insightful to folks. We have one other question that I want to get to because I think it's a really great one and it's a good lead into another question that I have for this panel. So I'd love to hear more about increasing the adoption rate of the platform. Sometimes, you know, you kind of go off and go and build a bunch of things because, okay, here we have investment into platform engineering and product, and then let's go build the thing. So I'd love to hear more about increasing the adoption rate.
I'm happy to jump in first on that again. I feel greedy for doing that, but I'm going to do it anyway. Um, so I'm actually going to put an example. So if any of you in Amsterdam, I'm at DevWorld the end of this week, and I'm speaking there with Booking.com, and that is about their DevX journey. And what was really interesting in there is they kind of address both of those things. So they, that kind of whole piece around the adoption and the and also kind of that excuse me excuse me, and that kind of environment without freedom piece as well that's on there. I they very much want to have innovation, but they also realize that doing things like having too much sprawl actually caused its own problems that they ended up winding back from because it was unmaintainable and and unrealistic. And I think the other part of the adoption rate, they have this vision about how it works. They have kind of like a foundation, there's pillars, and then there's like the roof, and their roof is cover from leadership. So like sponsorship from leadership that's kind of saying, hey, this is actually how we do things. This is the right way to do it. It doesn't mean you can't have innovation. It just means that we're doing it within some guardrails that make sure we're doing it with, to drive out the right value. But having that, like, that cover from above, so to speak, really kind of helps drive adoption. The other piece I would say about driving adoption is, generally, if you're making it easy for them to do the right thing, you make it easy for them to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing, they'll do the right thing, right? Why fight the system to go around it when it's much easier just to work with the system, and as I said in my previous answer, there's ways to get new things into a platform or to expand the platform to cater for specific use cases and ways to do that that are still within those guardrails, right? That still allow things to be scanned and secure and, have all the auditing and governance and compliance and everything that's required, but just make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. Engineers will generally adopt with that, right? Because it's the easiest route for them to get to their goal, which is to solve problems, build new features, and get them out in front of customers.
Yeah, shall I just add on that? Perfectly said, Miles, perfectly said. I think my experience is even at big orgs, like you want to go more carrot, less stick. Do you know what I mean? I think it's very tempting to see in big orgs, like this is the top-down mandate. We're all doing all the things. But like when I was a consultant, I used to see the most shadow IT in big orgs, right? Because everyone was like, I'm going to spin up what wasn't for sale back in the day, but everyone's like, I'm going to spin up a Roku or whatever and do my own thing on the side, right? And then suddenly you lost complete visibility into that because someone's got the keys to that account. They maybe not doing security scanning, as you're saying, Martin, and then kind of they're off doing their own thing. So I've been a big fan of platforms of again asking folks, what do you really want? And then that's the carrot, right? If we can, like the classic Netflix kind of like golden paths, as I think Martin you've already mentioned, but like if you can say like we'll bake in observability, very much your field, Gal, right? We can bake in observability like to your templates you get, and then we'll own that. We'll be first line support platform folks for that. Then suddenly developers are like, well, I'm definitely going to use that part of the platform. Otherwise, I'm on the hook for being on call, right? And there's a whole debate about whether you should be on call or not, whatever. But I do think the carrots of, hey, I'm going to bake in observability. I'm going to make it easy for you to be compliant on our systems. Like take all the sort of like stuff that developers don't like. Even I didn't enjoy the security stuff that's all being shifted left and all that. Like make it easy to do that in the platform. And as you said, Martin, I'm doing the right thing and I might have more time for coding. Like everyone's a winner, right? So I do think less stick, more carrot is the thing I've learned.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we started Epsagon, like at 2017, 2018, PLG was a big buzzword. I don't know, like if it still is, like, right, product-led growth. And we, like, part of the success of Epsagon, and this is talking like completely outward-facing, client-facing product, was that we were really easy to use, and this was like 50% of our effort, right? We, like, our first page was, instead of like empty dashboards, it was a wizard of, okay, here is exactly how you integrate. This is exactly the setup. Click here. And then we went out of our way to make integration easier. So integrating, we did tracing libraries, and usually that requires code manipulation, and you have to redeploy the stuff, and it's really, really high friction. So we did everything that we could in order to reduce that. We did like auto instrumentation to Lambda functions. We modified them on the runtime, like it had a one-click deployment. And this is really how we got users like adopting really quickly. They saw value, like the time to see value from the platform was like 5 minutes. Literally, you saw a trace of your infrastructure in 5 minutes. And this is like product-led growth. The reason that it was successful for us is because it led engineers go to their managers and say, hey, I want to use this product. And this is exactly where you want to get with your platform, right? You want to do kind of a PLG motion with your platform. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to use it. And if you'll get there, then I really, like, as you said, Daniel, if observability is baked in, there's no question of adoption, right? If I don't have to do anything to adopt it, then it's adopted by default. That's kind of where you want to get to.
Yeah, I love that, like how quick that time to value measure is really interesting. I've seen multiple projects at some incredibly large organizations where they're saying, oh, to onboard to a new product or to onboard a new engineer takes, I don't know, say 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Actually, I've seen it measured in months, and part of the value of a platform and all the things that go around a platform is that they suddenly go from having, onboarding takes months or weeks to onboarding takes hours or days, depending on whether that's onboarding to a new service or product or onboarding to, for a new employee. But the reduction is huge as a result, and I think that's a massive benefit.
Great. I actually want to double down on this conversation about really building better technologies and focusing on the tech side. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. How do you evolve a multi-platform team for consistency without making teams feel like they can't try new tooling or delivery approaches?
That's a hard one. I have some personal experience because when we got into Cisco, so the story is that they took us and 2 other startups that they bought, and we had like this very big vision of what we want to build, like together, because it made sense with synergy. The problem was we didn't use the same tools at all. Like we were running on AWS, another startup was running on GCP. We were in Python, they were in Java. They were using Terraform, we were using CDK. it was a mess. Like nothing were aligned, and then the internal SRE of Cisco were using like third type of tools. It was a mess, and we had a few approaches there. At the beginning, we tried to give a lot of autonomy. So we went full on microservices. I actually maybe touch another story about that later, but went full on microservices. Everyone could do whatever they want. We had different cloud accounts. We only had like very, very strict APIs. It was okay for some times, but after a while, we realized that at least from our experience, right? And this is, remember, this is just one data point, but the diversity of technologies really wasn't worth it, at least at some point. So for example, we were using CDK and we were using Terraform. So in order to integrate at some point of the system, like sharing credentials or sharing infrastructure keys or stuff like that, it really became a mess. It became a situation where it actually hindered communication, organizational communication between the companies, and kind of set up imaginary barriers. So we took the hard decision of standardizing, and we moved away from CDK. Everyone moved to Terraform, just to enable better collaboration between the organization, because the people aspect is not less important than the technological aspect. Rewriting this Terraform today with Gen AI didn't take that long, and people can learn tool faster than you'd expect. And compared to the problem that it causes in organizational communication, from my experience, I think like the standardization, even though we were sold on the microservices dream and everyone can do whatever they want, and I still believe that, right? Microservices has a lot of advantages in scaling operations and in specific use cases. But when you're talking about consolidation of what basic tool we're using and how we're communicating in the organization, and can I move one person from between teams, I think this basic standardization, there's a lot of value to it.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same. And I think there's kind of two ways to look at answering that question specifically as well, because there is, there is value in consistency. But one of the things I would consistently say, and this is something I've learned from personal experience, but you do need a mechanism for if somebody says, hey, do you know what, there might be a better way of doing this, and there is a time and a place for that to happen, and you do need a mechanism, and it's something you need to, especially if you're growing a platform team, because we had multiple teams who were building the platform, as well as multiple teams who were building products to deliver to the platform. There were more teams building to deploy to the platform than there were building the platform, for sure. But you kind of have this multi team, if that makes sense. And so you kind of have those two layers. I think the consistency is really important. It's one of the benefits of platform. But then equally, there is that kind of, you've got to have a mechanism for being able to say, actually, I think there might be a better way. And and actually having some criteria defined for what the better way is, to say, hey, you know what, actually, yes, this product, I don't know, product A the cost is the same, but the migration cost is Y and the overall value is Z. So, how long is that going to take us? What's going to be the impact? You can't just look at this has some cool things that might, that will save us time in the long run. It's the value of the investment of the time of the change, not just the change itself. I'm all for innovation. You heard me talk about it before. I'm all for that innovation. I think when you're talking about things that are deployed to the platform, there is a bit more freedom. I came from an organization that was built, like, they acquired often, right? And because of that, we had everything from COBOL to Node to Java to all running up in the cloud. In fact, even COBOL in containers in the cloud, right? So this is, the kind of level of diversity, but there were some standards, right? Hey, you're deploying to a containerized environment. We have these databases available. We have, you can use Lambda, you can use API Gateway, or if you're in Azure, this is what the environment landing zones look like. So we had those golden paths. What the products need to do as they came onto platform was kind of say, hey, there are some things that might be specific to your application that are difficult, that are not in the platform, but we need to find a way to solve that in the platform, right? It's a, you know, and it comes back to that cover from above, because the business wanted everyone to be in the platform because they wanted them to start taking advantage of things like shared authentication, you know, shared observability, shared infrastructure cost management, right? There was a whole raft of things that were a benefit of the platform that needed them to be on, but that meant that there were some edges in the products that were being deployed that needed to be trimmed off or found a different way to solve that problem. And, you know, often that was getting people in a room, you know, physically or virtually, to say, okay, this is what we do now. What are the options in the platform that can help us solve this? Or is this really a thing where we need to make a change in our landing zone to support it? Right. So you can have that flexibility, but you've got to have that route of conversation, you know, and going back to the DevOps thing, you know, communication was always key with that. You know, that's how that cultural side of that really works. I think that's no different in platform. You know, if you don't have a two-way conversation between platform and product teams and vice versa, and again, between engineering and management, platform and management, and both ways, you're never going to get that kind of adoption and that evolution that you need, right? Because we all know that the way technology moves, standing still is falling behind. That, you know, today's currency is tomorrow's technical debt. So
Nice, Martin. God, fantastic, like points you both made. Something you picked up on earlier, Martin, so this do allow teams time to innovate. Like we do like 20% time at Syntasso, like where we can, like 20% of our time roughly we can play around with new stuff. And I think like all big organizations I've worked at, like having that outlet for like, I want to try the latest cool thing. We all read the newsletters, right? We all like as technologists play around with stuff, and you shouldn't have to do it at the weekends. Like you should have some company time, I think, to play around with this stuff. So I've like, I remember adopting Mesos back in the day, because like the DevOps folks were like, hey, I'm going to play around like my 20% time on Mesos, and oh man, it's so much better than what we got going on over here. And that was kind of how we adopted it there. But I do want to double down on all the points about the framework. Like when I was a CTO, I say if we want to introduce like a new technology, like bring to me like the clear definition of the pain you're solving, and I want 3 solutions, and you got to say 3 good things and 3 bad things about each one. So I remember someone was like, we want Docker, right? And I'm like, cool, I love Docker too as well. But I'm like, what's the actual problem? And it turned out it was more about building like apps, like packaging apps. When we unpacked it, we actually went with like building like just images on VMs. Do you know what I mean? Ultimately, Docker would have added more complexity into the stack, but it was just forcing folks a little bit. Like you've had your fun time, play around. Feel free to like sort of the marketplace of ideas, come with ideas, but we do expect a challenge. Like it's not just, you know, all the points you both made, there's got to be a trade-off between standardization and like flexibility. And it's like come with some like problems, solutions, good and bad. And the act of getting people to do that, often like sometimes they'd even retract like the pitch. They're like, actually, I don't want to adopt this stuff now because I've realized this problem can be solved with some other things too.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Martin, on the metrics is really, really important, because on like how do you make the decision of are we adopting something or not, right? Everyone can experiment, but then it has to be crystal clear the metrics by which we decide the adoption. Because at the beginning, at my experience, it wasn't very clear, because we were just bought and we were figuring our way out. And you know, some people at my organization at first were really disappointed, like, oh, but why are we leaving out CDK? We love it. We hate Terraform. It's too complex. But then when you make it very data driven of this is the cost of implementation, this is the cost of change, this is the value that we're getting, then people tend to just agree, because they see that it's just not worth it. And just, you know, personal preference is usually less important when you have the data.
yeah, I will say that one of my favorite lessons I learned from one of my mentors years ago when I first started, you know, being involved in more senior management, and you know, his advice to me was that, you know, whenever I'm presenting anything, you know, the numbers will ultimately set me free. Like if you have the data to back up what you're proposing, you know, and the numbers will ultimately get you to where you want to be, you know, but also be willing to accept that the numbers might not give you the answer that you want, but you still have to accept them.
Kind of touching another question, like the last one that we have on the Q&A.
Yeah, so I know we have a lot of questions and we are not going to be able to get to all of them because we are at the last 5 minutes of our panel discussion. So I'm going to do a fun little thing while I merge everything that we have in chat, and anything that we don't get to, we'll just take up in the Slack channel, hashtag effective teams. So make sure you join our lead dev Slack workspace. It's 2025. I'd love to hear your predictions, your takeaways, maybe share any approaches or last minute methodologies that you'd like to give the folks listening here, and we'll go around, and then I think we'll be out of time. So let's start with Martin.
Sure. Oh, I mean predictions. I think we're gonna, we've seen kind of the table stakes of everybody seems to have Gen AI for code. And it's not everybody, but it's becoming ubiquitous, right? It's kind of like this is the general thing, it's accepted. What I think is we'll see that popping up, that kind of agentic style approach to AI will start popping up across the SDLC. We'll see it in fact, I've already seen it in things like, web front end testing, where it's not tied to all that brittle breaking of which particular HTML element to test and stuff. And it just tell it that you want to test it like this. This is the story I want you to flow, and it generates it, maybe resolving security problems automatically by creating a PR based on, what it knows about that security change. Maybe, it's solving a problem in your deployment pipeline because it understands what the error is and can give you, rather than you trawling through 1,000 logs. Maybe it's consolidating and summarizing information in incident response, right? To give you a kind of really nice consolidated view that helps you get to the root of the problem and make the right decision at the end. So that's kind of where I think I'm going to see, it's where I see things changing. I think, it's just those little injections of AI and Gen AI across the whole life cycle from start to end, including like building your stories and everything. I think we'll start to see more and more of that and more value driven from it. So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to go for my prediction.
Awesome.
I can jump in. It's hard to predict now, right? Because it's like Gen AI, those stuff is moving too fast. And when you're talking about 2025, you have to just talk about Gen AI. There's really, you have to talk about that first, get it out of the room, and then maybe talk about some other stuff. But really, we thought it was progressive. It's hard to say if AGI is next month or 5 years from now, at the point where none of us will have to work and we'll just go about in our flying cars, drinking our cocktails. But I think what is obvious is that AI can help us, and it's kind of like you said, Martin. AI is making everything easier and taking the mundane and technical work, and it kind of touches on everything that we're talking about on that you have to be more business and metric and business metric oriented when you're building the platform. So it's actually making it easier for you to be more business oriented because it's taking more of the technical and heavy lifting for you. So you can build all those high level, I guess, logical flows or logical things that you can serve to your teams rather than just focus on automating, when will a PR be created when a vulnerability is discovered, 1, 2, 3. So I think it's exciting because I think we'll see a lot of shift into the business logic rather than the bits and details.
Yeah, +1 to what you both said there. So it's fantastic. We're already using Gemini to write Terraform code, so with mixed success sometimes, right? We definitely have the human in the loop to make sure what we're putting out is like legit and testing it. But I like what you're saying, Martin, as well, like of the ability to like generate test like criteria like through AI as well, will be super interesting. So I'm definitely like seeing that. I think that will develop more and more. But I do really personally, I'm really looking forward to the AI being able to draw the insights out of things. I think you both sort of touched on that, but like I see more and more pushing out towards unstructured data and kind of record everything, and then have like literally upload the logs to ChatGPT and say, what do you see here? What should I be looking at? What's the thing I should be focusing on? Having AI sort of just crunch all the data for us, I think is really powerful. So I think there's definitely AI supporting the building aspects. I'm not sure that like if you're a platform engineer, if you're a DevOps engineer, I think still learn Terraform. I think still learn like the fundamentals, because then like that helps you debug what's going on with a lot more code being produced by AI. So I'm still bullish. I say folks I mentor, I'm like, do learn the fundamentals, and then you're gonna be in a good place for like leveraging the AI. But then I think from the, as you said, Gal, from the top down business perspective, like learn just to get all the data and ask questions. Like if that's the beauty, I think, of things like ChatGPT and Gemini and other brands. You can ask natural language questions. I will sometimes literally have a spreadsheet of data, load it in and go, like, tell me what you think most interesting column is and how does it correlate with the output of this, and it will tell me, and I'm like, this is amazing, right? And it's like an intern, as the cliche goes. It's not like a super high level PhD type person or whatever, but like it's good enough to point me in the right direction. And as a leader, I'm super excited with that. It saves me crunching all the data, gets my team working on more interesting things, right?
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. We heard a lot of really great insights, stories, recommendations, more on the strategic and then also technical side. So I hope this conversation really helped the folks that could attend. I know we have a couple of questions that are not couple. We have a few questions that we did not get to in this panel discussion. I've saved them and I will post them in our lead dev Slack channel. So we'll answer the questions there. Some really, really great questions. I really appreciate everybody's engagement and interactions for this panel discussion. I hope we can have more conversations in the future about platform engineering. It sounds like there are a lot of really great talking points and discussions. So let's all head over to the Lead Dev Slack channel. Thanks for joining, everybody. We hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.